So, again, just to talk a little bit about apologetics and not be too redundant, this idea of apologetics is different than most people think of the word apology. The word apology in our modern era, in our modern vernacular, is to say that you're sorry or express regret. There's a middle kind of term that is used on news, cable TV shows and things like that about, oh, he's an apologist for this or for that, and it's generally very negative. But what the word really means is to defend. It's a legal term that means to make your case. So just keep in mind, that's the kind of apologetics we're talking about. There's no believer here that is trying to apologize and say they're sorry for Jesus, for their faith. Quite frankly, the church probably has some things that we could apologize for in individual Christians. I have a lot of things. You can just ask my wife. I have a lot of things that I need to say I'm sorry for, okay? But my faith and Christianity is not one of them. But I can make an incredible defense if I'll feed my mind and learn, why does Christianity make sense? And that's what we're really here to talk about. So the kind of apologetics we're talking about, again, is a branch of theology that deals with the intellectual reasons for our faith, and generally those are proven and expressed in historical, scientific, and philosophical discussions and arguments. So the first thing I want to talk about, we're going to get back to a little bit about the what, but about the why. Okay, and so I want to talk a little bit about Pascal. You know that cutting-edge computer program from the 80s? No. Blaise Pascal, okay? He lived in the 17th century. He's a French mathematician, physicist, inventor, writer, and Christian philosopher. Pascal was an incredible individual. If you notice there, he didn't even live 40 years. He was 39 years old when he died. He was one of the first inventors of a mechanical calculator in the 17th century. I think he did that by the time he was 16 or 20, somewhere in there. In 1654, he corresponded with a French mathematician, I believe it's Fermat, on the subject of probabilities, and really from that collaboration came and was born the entire mathematical theory of probabilities. And this idea of probabilities to come up with what's called Pascal's wager, okay? Now, what Pascal said is that this wager offers a pragmatic reason for believing in God. That even under the assumption that God's existence is unlikely, the potential benefits of believing are so vast that it makes having faith in God makes sense. It's rational. Now, I'll tell you right now, there's been a lot of people argue against Pascal's wager in that context and against it in generally. And I would also probably say, from my perspective, I think maybe his claim is a little too strong. I don't know if you can get from probabilities to belief in God, but I think it definitely offers a pragmatic reason for investigating the truth of Christ. Why? Because the stakes are just too high. And that's exactly what Pascal's wager talks about. Now, I'm not going to get into a big math class. I couldn't explain probability to you if I wanted to, okay? But I am going to talk a little bit about, on a very first floor level, about what it is. There's basically two options that lead four possible outcomes, okay? There's belief in God is one option, and you can either, yes, I believe in God, or no, I don't believe in God. Based on that, there are two possible outcomes. There are two other correlating factors of the existence of God. Either yes, he does exist, or no, he doesn't exist, okay? So that makes four options. I can believe in God, and he does exist. I can believe in God, and he doesn't exist. I cannot believe in God, and he does exist. Or I can not believe in God, and he doesn't exist. Now, again, I don't want to be too complicated. I think that's pretty straightforward, that there's basically four things about our belief in God. It's either true or it isn't. We either believe or we don't. Now, if I believe in God and he doesn't exist, it's not really a tremendous swing one way or the other. I probably live a pretty good life, okay? As a Christian, I'm a moral person. I try and do what's right. I probably have a good life. not really any tremendous plus or minus there. If I don't believe in God and he doesn't exist, well, I don't know. Some people would argue they probably lived a better life. They had a lot of fun and whatnot, but I've known a lot of people, including myself, when I lived a life when I didn't act like I believed God existed, and you know what? There were some terrible consequences from that. So maybe it isn't all that it's cracked up to be, but again, these two options, if God doesn't exist, could go either way. There's plenty of room for argument and discussion about who'd live the better life or what their life would be like. It doesn't really matter, though, because when you're dead, right? If this is true. Here's where it gets a little tricky, though. Here's where it begins to matter. Because if God does exist, and I believe in him, then I get to go to heaven according to the Christian faith, right? Now, and again, whatever you think in your mind may or may not be what heaven is, but it's obviously the best possible outcome of existence, at least, again, as the Christian faith defines it, okay? So, in this option, heaven, I have the option of the greatest possible outcome in existence there possibly could be. What about the other side of the equation? If I choose not to believe in God and he does exist, I have the complete opposite. I have the worst possible outcome, the worst possible existence, and according to Scripture, that lasts forever. That puts the stakes in a little bit different perspective, doesn't it? So the question is, are these stakes worth the risk of being wrong? All because you wouldn't look at it? All because you wouldn't examine the evidence? Now, somebody that makes an intelligent decision to take that risk and make that decision and has looked at all the evidence, different situation. But the question is it worth looking at? Do those two options make it worth examining the evidence and making an intelligent decision about whether to believe in God or not? I think that the answer to that should be very evident, because you have the two most stark contrasts of outcomes that you could possibly have. The best, most wonderful, any positive words you can use to describe it on one hand for eternity, and the complete negative outcome, all the worst words you could ever think of to describe it on the other hand. So that's what we want to talk about a little bit today. And not so much that particular, but that's the stakes that are on the table. So now, again, for those of you that were here last night, you've seen a lot of this. But I want to go over it again because I think it really is important for us to understand what this is about. I'm not a rocket scientist. I don't have a whole bunch of tricks up my sleeve and different things. I've got one thing. It's the pyramid. Okay, so I'm going to just go over this real quickly. The apologetics pyramid begins at the base with, does God exist? And that's one of the things Dr. John DePoe is going to talk to you today specifically about some of the philosophical evidence to indicate that the existence of God. But that's the first question you've got to ask if you're examining these issues is, does God exist? There's scientific evidence as well. We're not really getting into that. We could do a whole weekend on just the scientific evidence, but let me just cite a couple things for you. There's a thing called the argument from design. Big Greek word, teleological, but we just call it from design, that the universe appears to be designed. There's things like specified complexity, okay? Now, simplest form, if you woke up this morning and went out to your kitchen and the box of alphabet cereal was on the table and the letters spelled out, take out the garbage, would you think, in any world, would you think, oh, that just happened? The box tipped over and spilled those letters out, okay? Specified complexity is communication. It's information. And we know that information only comes from an intelligent being. The spelling of take out the garbage could only have come from somebody who knows how to spell take out the garbage, okay? Now, granted, I'll give you, there is some small probability. I can't do the calculations, but it's very small, infinitesimal, that the box did tip over and knock those letters out. But not many times in this world is that going to happen. So that's the most simple explanation of it. I'll give you another one. If you're driving through the Midwestern part of this country and you come through these mountains they call the Black Hills, and all of a sudden you looked up and saw a place they call Mount Rushmore, would you ever think that that happened because it rained real hard, water ran, and made those faces in that mountain? Okay? Now, I've seen some incredible formations, natural formations of mountains. There's another one, I forget which state it's in, but you can clearly see what seems like an Indian's head. But he doesn't have eyes and a mouth and nose and nostrils and, you know. So when you look at Mount Rushmore, you can clearly tell that that was designed. How about the movie Contact? Does anybody remember that movie? Okay. We have a whole branch of NASA that spends their time listening to outer space. It's called SETI, Search for Intelligent Extraterrestrial Intelligence. Because we know if we ever get a signal that comes through the airwaves that's got specified complexity, it's got information, that had to have come from intelligence out there. Well, we see this all around us. And primarily we see that in one of the things that's called the fine-tuning argument. Okay, that there are hundreds, I think there's 130 it seems to me, but there's just an incredible number of physical constants in our universe that some of them, if they were off by as much as part of a percent, life couldn't exist. I'll just name a few. The strong nuclear force, if it was off by more than 2%, life couldn't exist. The weak nuclear force, the ratio strength of gravity to that of electromagnetism, if it's off, life can't exist. And those are just scratching the surface. Now, you can also get to things about, those are on a micro level, on a macro level. The position of the Earth within the solar system. We're in the live zone. There's only so much distance between the sun that will support life, and we just happen to be in there. I think that's about 10% one way and 15% the other way, that it could be off, and if it was, there would be no life. The position of our solar system within the galaxy. If we weren't where we're at in the Milky Way, life couldn't exist here. The position of the galaxy within the universe. Again, it's all appears to be fine-tuned. So there's a couple more examples. And the last one I'd give you in regards to scientific evidence is DNA. Simple bacteria, the amount of information in the DNA would fill one volume of an encyclopedia. Human DNA contains 1,000 cyclopedic volumes of data in exact order. These are all things that indicate, do they prove God exists? Probably not. Personally, I don't believe you can prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that God does exist, and I know you can't prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that He doesn't exist, because to do that, you'd have to be God. It's called a universal negative. If you look it up, to prove that He doesn't exist, you would have to know everything that there is to know. You would have to be God. So, again, self-defeating. Okay, so, and I went a little bit long on that, because I didn't touch much about it, and we're not going to talk about it tonight. But those are things to look into and to educate yourself about, that there's an incredible wealth of scientific information that speaks to whether there's a God that exists or not. From there, we move on to which God then? If there is a God, which God is it? And as we talked last night, I mean, there's literally hundreds of religions that have hundreds of gods. Some religions by themselves have hundreds of gods, okay? There's an awful lot of gods out there. So which God? And this is generally answered by historical and philosophical evidence. Today, for example, we're going to look at the reliability of the New Testament. We've got an incredible historian, Dr. Mike Licone, is going to talk about the reliability of the New Testament, because that gives a pretty strong indicator of which God. But the philosophical, again, we're not going to really get into that. I'll give you a few things, though. If you look at the philosophical evidence that indicates God exists, you come up with a list of characteristics that God would have to have, okay? For a being to have created the universe, all time, space, and matter, we get a list of, there's about 14, I think, but just a few of them. They'd have to be transcendent. They have to be beyond the universe. They'd have to be omnipotent, right? They'd have to be all-powerful, because they created all power. They'd have to be omniscient, because they'd have to know everything there is to know to create the universe. They'd have to be eternal to create time. And they'd have to be personal to create persons. There's nothing we know of, there's no machine that can create personality. Only a person can create personality. So those are just a few. But you know the amazing thing when you get this list of attributes this being would have to have from philosophical discovery? You know, we find a book that was written over about 4,000 years by 40 different authors that claims to be written by that guy, by that being. It's called the Bible, okay? And the most powerful thing to me about that is that when that was written, when there's a book being written that claims to be written by a being that is transcendent, omnipotent, omniscient, eternal, and personal, we had no idea. There was nobody on the face of the earth that had any idea of these philosophical arguments that would say that the Creator would have to have those things. To me, that's pretty tremendous evidence. But that's what's involved in looking at which God. And again, we're going to get into that specifically in regards to the reliability of the New Testament. It can give us some pretty strong indication. And then we have Jesus, because as Christians, in the Christian worldview, we believe that Jesus is the most clear revelation that God has made. That the most clear revelation of God is in the person of Jesus Christ. So what can we look at with him? We can look at historical evidence. He was a person in history. So there's a record that indicates whether he's who he claimed to be. And finally, we look at the resurrection. This is the pinnacle of the Christian faith. This is the cornerstone. And that's why we've brought in, again, Mike Lacone is one of the world's foremost experts on the historicity of the resurrection. And that's, again, how that is proven. If the resurrection happened, guess what? We can turn the pyramid upside down because all of it has to be true. If the resurrection occurred, Jesus had to be who he claimed to be, which is God. So there has to be a God, and it has to be the God of the Bible. Again, I apologize for the redundancy. If you saw that last night, I don't really apologize for it. It's important to hear it again and to really have that cemented in. But I think it's important, again, to set the table of what are we talking about? How does apologetics work? What is that all about? And hopefully at a very simplistic, because that's all the better I can do, I hope it's a very simple presentation of what apologetic means, because it matters. And again, last night we talked about the study that was done that indicates students primarily leave the faith because of intellectual skepticism and doubt. But I'm telling you that intellectual skepticism and doubt doesn't just affect students. It affects other people in our society that don't believe in God because they don't think it's intellectually viable to believe in God and the Christian worldview. It affects Christians because they don't know that the faith is so intellectually viable that it stands head and shoulders above any other worldview in being able to put together the puzzle of what's life and existence about. And we can't go into all of that in a conference. That's why we've got these cards in your packets, because you really need to invest some time to whether you're a seeker, well, you're not going to get enough information in this conference to be able to make an educated decision. Okay? But hopefully it'll pique your curiosity and it'll get you to the point of realizing, hey, I probably should take a look at this. If you're a believer, we're not going to be able to teach you everything you need to know. We're hoping to equip you with something that Monday morning when these conversations come up about, oh, the Bible, you can't believe that, it's been rewritten 15 times, you'll be able to say, you know, that's not really true. Would you like to know what is true? So we want to equip you, but it's just the beginning. And the church has to realize that we have to educate ourselves in regards to why our faith is reasonable if we want to approach reasonable people with our faith. So it affects everyone. And again, that's the wager that everybody's making. Are these stakes worth the risk of not knowing? As Christians, again, we'll go back to 1 Peter. We're commanded to do this, to always be prepared, to make a defense to anyone who asks you for the hope that's in you. Are you skeptical? Are you a doubter? Are you agnostic? Hey, that's okay, but don't bury your head in the sand. Learn enough to make an educated decision because the stakes are just too high.